welcome to our session this evening, which is all around running and being safe and successful at residentials, camping trips, and our group nights as well. Lots of the things are similar of how we keep safe when we're working with our young members. Lots of the things are the same. Some things are slightly different when we're going for overnight trips or maybe for days away from our regular meeting space. So it's all, lots of the things have in common and are similar, but there are some differences as well for everybody to be aware of. So for those who don't know, my name's Lauren. I work at Woodcraft Folk as a program manager. So I do lots of work around our activities, around our aims and principles, working with our young members, delivering events, delivering a lot of events at our centres and campsites as well. And I'm also a volunteer leader at my local Pioneer Adventurer group. So I will, yes, not enjoying my screen share at all, so hopefully it will balance out as we go through. Felix, would you like to introduce yourself whilst I have a go at my computer?
Thank you, Lauren. Hi, everybody. My name is Felix Pepler. I'm Woodcraft Folk's head of centres, and my responsibility is to look after our primary centres, which are Lockabrook, Cudham, Hightgate, and Biblins. And I may explain a little bit more about those later on. Just to give you a bit of context about the staffing structures here. So Lauren works really closely with the programmes and memberships team. I work with the centres team, and we form two of the main pillars of the Woodcraft Folk organisation, I guess, in terms of the staff teams. But we work very closely together to support each other in our respective areas.
Thanks, Felix. So briefly looking over what we're going to go through this evening. So we're going to look at the kind of background rationale. Why do we go on camping and residential trips? Why do we run our groups? Why are we bringing young people together? We're going to look at how we can stay safe, look at those kind of minimum expectations. As I say, lots of the things are in common of how we keep our young people safe at our group nights, at our residentials, at our camping trips, but we'll look at some of those differences as well. We'll look at how we can build on some good practice that we know is going on with our groups when we've spoken to them, when we've heard about camps, when we've been on camping and residential trips ourselves. We're going to look at how we can reduce barriers to participation, hear about, hopefully from some of the people here, about how you try to reduce the barriers to participation from young people and also volunteers as well. And then we'll have time for questions and comments. I'm more than happy if people want to put questions or comments in the chat as we go through, or interrupt me and unmute yourselves if that's easier for you. So feel free to ask as we go along, but we'll have space at the end for questions as well. So, I mean, I've got a question for everybody here. 2 questions. As I say, feel free to put the answer in the chat or unmute yourselves. I think I've just edited the chat so that people can talk to the whole group. First question, how often have you been on a Woodcraft Folk camp or residential? Some people already answered that when they introduced themselves. Some people have never been on a camp or a residential. Some people weren't here when we did introductions, so that's fine. Have you been on 3 camps a year for the last 10 years? Have you never been on a camp? Are you like me and end up going on more than 3 camps a year? How often have you been away on residential? So some people are saying they've been on 8 million as a child, but none as a kinsfolk or as an adult, they think. And some people say never, but hope to sometime soon. As I say, sometimes when it's in the cold and the dark, it's hard to think about those kind of summer camp experiences, but hopefully we can think about residential experiences as well.
Yeah, I've been over 30 years, probably aside from COVID, every year, been on some camp or residential. So since I was a child, right the way through young DF, young adult, whatever.
We've got that in common, definitely.
Yeah, I'm the same. Been lots of camps as a kid, and then I've helped out at a few over the last couple of years as an adult volunteer.
I always find it's not an essential in any way, but it's always interesting, I think, whether you've had experiences as a young person within Woodcraft Folk going on residentials and camping trips, or with other organisations, or when you've been at school and seeing that as an adult or as a young leader. It's really definitely interesting to see people kind of coming back into an organization or kind of working with young people. And often people say, oh, this was something that I did when I was younger and I wanted to share that with other people. So that brings us, so some people are saying in the chat they've just joined this term and have never been on a camp. So hopefully that's something to look forward to as being part of the group that you've joined. You can see that my screen has stopped sharing again, which is really annoying. But the next question, why do we go on camping and residential trips? So why do we go on overnight stays together as a group with our young people, with our young members? Why do people think that we do that? Or why do you do that as a volunteer? So in the chat, we've got to have fun, to build friendships, to learn life skills, to cement our values, to work together cooperatively. All really great, great comments, and I agree with those things as well. Definitely to have fun. I think that's number one reason to go away. Somebody else said give kids independence from their parents. Yeah, definitely, really important. Really important. Independent trips, definitely for myself. Growing up in Woodcraft Oak, really enjoyed having that time away. Also, sometimes had to take the siblings with me, but often good time to have away. So the reasons that we have come up with and put here, hopefully everybody can see them, is to create a kind of temporary utopia. So I think as Anna, who put in the chat, to work together cooperatively and to reinforce our values, to go through the kind of aims and principles of Woodcraft Oak and to really kind of put them into action, cooperating together, working towards kind of shared goals, to develop and deepen the friendships, which some other people definitely put into the chat as well. So not just between the young people themselves, but to develop friendships between different volunteers, different people within your group, different people within your district, to also kind of develop those relationships, as somebody put in the chat as well, with adults who are not your parents, working out how different personalities work, that everybody has different skills to bring to the table. Building confidence and skills, so confidence in all kinds of different things, maybe in some of the activities that you've done at camp, maybe building confidence in being independent from your parents or being away from the adults that you have at home, building on skills, whether that's bushcraft skills, whether that's making eggy bread, whether that's kind of working together cooperatively, developing independence, which we've already mentioned, and also learning to lead. So as you grow up through the organization or even being a volunteer, you learn different skills of leadership, how to, as I say, cooperate together, work together, and how to take on different roles. So lots of young people comment on how much, like I just said, kind of they learn to cook, they learn about different meals, learn how to adapt to different allergies, different dietary lifestyles, just through being part of that sort of temporary community that you create when you go off camping together and learning about different people's backgrounds, cultures, what they don't see, and that sort of thing. Felix, were you going to mention something there about our centres a bit more?
Yeah, I will briefly. Thank you, Lauren. And just to agree with you and to reiterate that point about how these are opportunities to build new relationships are really important. In my experience working in residential education, that was one of the main factors that schools would evaluate positively on, and it would break down those kind of hierarchies between adults and children and each other, and those kind of new peer groups were enabled to form and merge, which was really important. And one thing that gets often missed in this conversation around what are the benefits of residentials and camping trips and so on is actually for the people who are at home, who don't go on those trips as well, because they get the opportunity to be a different kind of person without that person there. And they do say that absence makes the heart grow fonder and things like that. But it's a great opportunity to celebrate that being apart, coming back together. And I think those are really, really important things. Just to remind everybody that we are talking about camping and residentials, and Woodcraft Oak have 4 very well-formed residential education centres. So we do activities, high adventure activities in the Peak District in Lockabrook, where we can take groups of 40 or so, and do all kinds of wonderful things, water sports and caving and hill walking. We've got a camping barn up in the Calder Valley called Highgate, which we can take groups of about 30 and do programs there, or groups can run their own programs. We've got a lovely place in Cudham down on the Kent borders, and that's a more of a woodland-based nature environmental studies centre. Fantastic. And we've got quite a large site, camping site, with some multi-accommodation options on the banks of the River Wye near Monmouth. And yeah, it's about 18 acres, and it's really lovely flat land right on the banks of the River Wye. Very, very beautiful. And if you're not familiar with the centres, I really encourage you to visit the website, learn about the centres, and actually, in relation to the conversation we're having now, get in touch with the centres and speak to them. And I'll say it here, I'll probably say it again later. If you have any concerns or questions about residential accommodation, either at one of our centres or somewhere else, you are welcome to give us a shout, give any of our centres a shout and talk to them. Okay, thanks, Lauren.
I feel like this is an appropriate moment for me to say that I was at the opening of Highgate.
Wow.
That's a good claim
Fantastic.
to fame.
I think it is, because when I've said that to other people, they've all looked a bit like, oh, well, I don't know anyone who's.
You're in
Who
the right
was.
sphere for that to be a claim to fame.
Yeah, exactly.
And are you still in the area at all?
No, I mean, we'd taken a trip. So I grew up in Liverpool in Woodcraft, and we'd taken like a trip because it was this opening ceremony of the centre. So we went for this walk in the pouring rain up which had, like, you know, the opening ceremony of the opening of the centre. And then yeah, went back, and I think I've stayed there once since about 15 years ago.
Well, you're very welcome to come back, and I've made a note to get in touch with you in the future, Anna, and get some recollections and reflections from you, if that's okay.
Oh gosh, it will be dredging my brain from a long time ago, but I can try.
Okay.
But yeah, it's
Well,
just
thank you for sharing
it's
that,
not a
then.
great location from Glasgow. That's all, because it's about 5 hours
Yeah,
away.
true.
So
Yeah, we can all spend some of this session
Digress.
pressuring Felix into buying a centre in Scotland.
we so should.
Maybe we'll create a whole new session for that. So what we're going to go through, thank you, Anna, for sharing. I would have loved to have been at an opening of a centre. Maybe I will be when we get our centre in Scotland. So we're going to talk about the minimum expectations of kind of keeping everybody safe whilst we're, as I said at the beginning, lots of these things relate to being at group night as well. And so hopefully lots of people either know about these things already, or if you're new to the organisation, you're sort of learning slowly that these things are going on in the background, maybe without you realising. And as you're taking on more of a volunteering leadership role, you might start to find out about these things. So lots of these things relate not only to our camping and residential trips, but keeping young people safe in general. But quite a lot of these some of these are focused on taking young people away overnight, or taking them to a different place out of your kind of local area and where you usually meet up. So we're going to start by talking about the kind of event management, where we're going, what we're going to do. So it's really compulsory to do a site visit at the venue that you're staying at. As Felix just mentioned, if you're going to a Woodcraft Folk Centre, you can get in touch with the team, you can find out more, you can look on the website, you can see pictures, you can see videos, you can see other people enjoying the centre. But really important, if you're going to a scout site, a guide site, another independent hostel or an independent site, to go and do a site visit, see what the hazards are around there, see how the site is, work out where you could go for a nice walk, work out whether you can get food deliveries there, that sort of thing. As with all of our Woodcraft Folk activities, group nights included, going to do different activities with our groups, we need at least 2 adults, 2 volunteers aged 18 plus who have DBS and membership, or PVG in Scotland and membership, attending to make it a Woodcraft Folk activity. As with anything, we need, for a camping and residential trip, a named coordinator and safeguarding lead. So this is something within our relatively new, but within the last kind of 9 months, we've released a residential and camping checklist, which Felix will kind of talk us more through later on in the session. But having a named coordinator and safeguarding lead, as with leading our groups, often best for that not to be the same person, to share the load, to work as a team and be able to problem solve together. So having somebody who is the coordinator, somebody who is the safeguarding lead, and putting their names into the form, excuse me. We need to be able to meet our adult-child ratios. For those who need reminding of those, we recommend that for wood chip, so under 6s, we have a 1:3 adult-child ratio. For elfins, we have a 1:5 adult-child ratio. For pioneers, age 10 to 12, it's a 1:8 adult-child ratio. And for venturers, it's a 1:10. Now, obviously, if we're going away and we're staying overnight and we're doing different activities, maybe bushcraft activities, campfires, those kinds of things, we're probably going to want more adults than that minimum 1:8 or 1:10 or 1:5 ratio. But that is the minimum as we're going through the minimum expectations. We also expect that volunteers are identified for each age group where appropriate. So if you're doing a district-wide camp, thank you, with different groups there, having an adult who is responsible for the elfins, and that the elfins can call upon that adult should they need them, and the pioneers having their own adult as well, designated adult, and for each age group having somebody designated to them. Obviously, all adults at Woodcraft Folk should be approachable for anything, but having somebody who specifically is going to go and check in on that age group throughout the weekend, check in on their well-being, check in on whether they have everything, checking in that there's no wet sleeping bags, leaking tents, spiders in rooms that people aren't comfortable with, or all of those kind of age-appropriate issues that might be going down. Moving on to the kind of minimum expectations of volunteer screening and training. Again, this is quite similar to when we're just running a group night and running our groups. So adults and DFs who are volunteering have completed screening. So that might be PVG checks, DBS checks. Anybody who's staying overnight at a residential needs to have a PVG or a DBS check. That is compulsory and essential. And the reason for that is that when we're taking young people out of their homes, out of their usual places where they usually reside, we are taking on kind of loco parentis role. We're being their caregivers for the weekend. And so we just need to make sure that we are keeping everybody safe, that everybody's been through the relevant screening needed to take care of the young people for the weekend. We expect that key volunteers, so that safeguarding lead, the camp coordinator, maybe those age-related group coordinators, will have undertaken some safeguarding training. That could be the NYA online safeguarding course for level 1, which I'll put the link in the chat to a bit later on. That could be a more advanced level 2 safeguarding course. Some people have those for work, some people don't. Some people might have taken them as part of being a group leader. But the NYA online level 1 course is really good it's aimed at volunteer group leaders. So it's aimed very much at volunteers that are taking on roles of leading residentials, leading group nights, taking young people away for weekends and summer camps and that kind of thing. We expect that all volunteers understand the safeguarding policy and procedures, that they've been shared with a risk assessment, which Felix will come to in a while, that they are aware of the code of behaviour and how we expect adults and volunteers and DFs as well who are helping out to behave whilst we're at camp. What are the expectations of this person who's coming to join us for the weekend? And also that they are aware of how to raise concerns. So having disclosure forms available in case they are needed, having them in a space that everybody knows where that space is, because there's no use in saying, oh, we had them, they were in the kitchen, if not everybody knows that they're in the kitchen. So sharing those things with all of the volunteers who are going to be present. So I'm going to pass over to Felix to talk about managing risk whilst we're with our groups and young people.
Thanks, Lauren. Before I get started, just to remind everybody that if you have any questions and you're jotting down ideas to the side, we will get back to them afterwards, because I appreciate there is a lot of information in this presentation. So we're going to look at some minimum expectations around risk and risk management, and how we look at activities and first aid and things like that. And I just first want to draw your attention to the requirement for all Woodcraft Folk groups to log their visits as part of the planning process. And that visit logging can take place on a form that is widely available on our website. It's here, thank you, Lauren, And if we have a look, we'll just do a quick scroll down. So you've got your generic, who are you details, what group are you working with, contact, your dates of activity, the number of people you're anticipating taking, who are your volunteers, where you're going, that kind of thing. All very, very straightforward, very clear. Then we're looking at the event management, which Lauren has started to talk about and gone through, volunteer screening and training. Managing risk, which we're going to have a look at now, but it's a really useful tick box exercise to make sure that you're covering the basics, and then moving down through to transport at the bottom. Wow, that was a whistle stop tour. Thanks, Lauren. That's great. Okay, so I think the first thing to share is my feeling that everybody that I've ever worked with, every organization and school and place, does health and safety and risk management in slightly different ways. And it's always interesting to see how they vary. And what I will say is that Woodcraft folk have done their very best to make it straightforward and simple. So I'm encouraging you to use our forms and our processes as far as possible. I welcome that you might want to review and see other examples, which is great, but come back to ours and make sure you do ours as a minimum. We have some fantastic resources available on the website for you to look at and print off and download and all that kind of thing to take you through some of the basics. We're going to have a look at risk first. Now, a lot of people are really scared about looking at risk, but it's really quite common sense and practical in terms of how risk can be managed. And I would just say it's really about being observant and considerate and being space aware. I think that's probably how I would describe it. And thinking about what's going on and thinking about those kind of things that could happen in camp. Everybody has got experience of being a child, and you'll know as a child the kind of things that you might have got up to and did, which would have presented risk to yourselves and to adults who might be considering your risk and so on. So draw on that personal experience and draw on your own experiences of working within risk situations. And what we're talking about, when we're talking about risk, we're not talking about getting rid of it because we need risk in our lives. We're talking about managing risk and recognizing that risk is a good thing and we need the tools to take us through risk safely. So I'm just going to introduce you to the Woodcraft form on risk assessment. Lauren, could you pick that up for me? I'm not sure if you've got it there at all. So we should see that coming up in a second. Thank you. And what I would encourage you to do is to complete one of these forms. And if we just scroll through it, you'll see that what the risk assessment tool asks you to do is identify the sources of harm, for example, as it's clearly indicating here, the environmental hazards that you might be experiencing, those things that are related to activity, those things that are relating to participants and the interactions and the abilities of those participants who are engaging in those activities, and then those kind of external things, the weather, where you are, the landscape, all that kind of thing. And thinking there's if you go down, yeah, thanks, Lauren. If you scroll down, very simply, you're being asked to identify what is the hazard, who could be harmed, and what is the mitigation measure. And within considering the mitigation, it's often useful also to think, if something does happen, how will that be dealt with? And not just about how will you avoid something. So, for example, it's one thing to consider that there may be wasps or bees that might cause a sting, but it's important also to have the thing that you will have on hand to deal with that if that should happen. So just to give you a bit of more of a scientific context about risk management, you'll often see it scored. And what people are doing when they're scoring it is they're looking at the likelihood of something happening. We can come back to that for a minute, Lauren. We're okay now. Come out of the form, thank you. We're looking at the likelihood of something happening, and we're timesing that by the severity of that thing happening, and that gives us a score. And if we do that out of 5, with 1 being low and 5 being high, then obviously the higher the number, the more we're alerted to that as a potential danger. Oh, sorry, bear with me. So I've got a visitor coming in. Excuse me. Hello. Hang on a minute. Sorry, I'll be back with you in a second. Lauren, can you pick up for a little bit? Is that all right?
It's fine. Yeah. So I think where Felix was at was talking about the kind of risk assessment, looking at how likely something is to happen, as he said, between the kind of list 1 to 5, thinking about how severe the impact of that would be if it was to happen. And then looking at those mitigations, what are we going to do? Are we going to have a first aider on hand when we're using tools in bushcraft? Are we going to ensure that everybody's had a good safety demonstration and briefing before the activities begun? What mitigations are we taking? And then in the final column, kind of how, now that we've taken those mitigations, the severity, if these things do happen, will still be quite high, but the likelihood of them happening should have gone down slightly. As Felix said, we can't take away risk completely, because then we wouldn't do anything, we wouldn't leave our houses, we wouldn't be working with young people, definitely. So we can only try to limit the impact that taking these risks and taking part in risky activities has on ourselves and our young people. I think Felix is back.
Thank you, Lauren. I'm sure you've contributed something really useful there. What I will say is have a look around about how other people manage risk as well, because like I said, it can be done very differently in different places. Lauren, I've put a link in here for an organisation that has a different way of recording or doing their risk assessments. So perhaps if we can take a quick look at that, that'd be really helpful. That's it. So you can see here an example about how London Wildlife Trusts manage their risk assessments, and I quite like this because it shows you what it does is it gives you in a sort of time activities fashion. So if you're walking around site, therefore the person who's reading this risk assessment is considering the site and those kind of risk aspects, and then the activities are listed in the second column, what happens in the third, and then the mitigations in the fourth. So that's quite useful, and they've given it a score as well, the L standing for low on the end, and you can just see how they've gone through it. And a list like this, and the one that we use for Woodcraft Folk, are great for the person who is taking some responsibility around those areas or the whole of the risk assessment process to kind of mark that they're doing this. Some forms will also include owner, ours does. So it gives you the opportunity to put your name against it, and it just tells everybody who's responsible, not for necessarily managing that risk, but who's observed it and who's assessed it as well. Okay, we come back off that, Lauren. Just some practical things, really. I think it's really important that you get as many people involved in assessing risk as possible. So when you're in that planning stage and you're working with others to identify those activities that you're doing, what time things might happen in an evening, where you're going, you consider as much as you can about the environment that you're going to, and plan with others, because bringing people together to understand and take part in risk assessing is really important. And again, as far as possible, use this as an opportunity for working with young people as well. Young people are very aware about risk and appreciate being engaged in talking about risk and identifying it. Of course, the more they get engaged with it, the more able they are to deal with it as well. So get everybody involved. Make sure you've got those contact points where you're meeting people and just checking in throughout the day or after an activity or at the end of the day or in the morning, and make sure that risk assessing is part of your kind of general narrative and process of the day. Keep it dynamic. That means that when it's written down, it doesn't mean to say it's fixed in stone. Things change a lot, weather conditions, the people who are on the residential might change, some of your activity providers might change, the activities themselves might change completely unexpectedly, and you find yourselves doing something completely different. So that means that you need to quickly consider doing a new risk assessment based on that change that's happened. Don't be afraid of it. Just make sure that you're aware that it should be done. As I said, don't really try to copy and paste completed templates. But please feel free to use them to inform how your risk assessments are evolved and developed. Use your completed templates to inform improvements. And make sure that if you're repeating the residential or the camping trip, you don't just dig them out from the filing cabinet, you actually go through them and make sure that they're still up to date and current and for you. As I've said before, you're really welcome to speak to anybody in the centres team, at the centres themselves, or me, or Lauren indeed, for any advice or input, and we'll be happy to provide that. So what do I got here? Sorry, I've got another. Oh yeah, that's right. So my predecessor, Andy Taylor, produced a video, and the video was actually undertaking a practical exercise going through how to complete a risk assessment. I have to say it's a brilliant presentation. It's about 45 minutes to an hour long, but it gives you a really good in-depth account of preparing and undertaking a risk assessment. It's available on the website. Again, it's one of our great resources. Use it if you're not sure how to do it. And finally, you know, when you've done things right, or when you've gone through an activity, it's important, I think, we celebrate and share the results. We celebrate the fact that people might not have been injured, or if they have, we've dealt with it in an appropriate way and kept people safe. And share with others your practices around managing risk and assessing risk. Right, I think I'm going to hand on to Lauren for a bit.
Thanks, Felix. So just to finish the other things around sort of managing risk, Felix has given us a really great rundown there around risk assessments, how important that is, also taking an ownership, as you say, on different roles to help kind of spread the load, as we said a bit earlier, avoid volunteers feeling like everything is on one or two people's heads, because that can be difficult when you're trying to organise a camping or residential trip, or, as I say, group night activities as well. So having first aid needs assessed, making sure that we have appropriate provision for that, having a named person at group nights, having somebody with first aid training at camps and residentials, and also just to note that our activities that are covered by our insurance, well, we expect that we are either taking part in activities that are covered by our insurance, our usual kinds of arts, crafts, walks, games, outdoor activities, bushcraft, that sort of thing, or that we're taking part in activities that are delivered by qualified external instructors with their own public liability insurance that we'll be using during those activities. Moving on to kind of participants and programme, as Felix said, please feel free to interrupt if I am speaking too quickly. If you want to ask any questions, share anything, please do. Participants and programme, so making sure that we have health and emergency contact, health information and emergency contact information for all participants, whether that's parents, carers, grandparents, but having consent from kind of legal guardians for under 18s who are attending our camps and residentials, also with our group activities, that is essential. So making sure we've given a briefing, told the volunteers and the participants, as Felix said, really important to include our young people when we're planning residentials and whilst we're delivering them. So talk to our participants, talk to our volunteers. What do we expect of them over the weekend? What do they expect from us as maybe camp coordinators or activity organisers or KPs looking over the food? What are they expecting from us, and what do we expect from them in return over the weekend? Making sure that our programme has been planned, taking into account the needs of the participants who are going to be taking part and the skills of the available volunteers. I don't think that it is wise to be taking part in bushcraft activities if the leader doing them has never taken part in bushcraft activities themselves. Look at the strengths of your volunteers, look at the skills and the knowledge and the previous experiences that they have. How can we make a fantastic programme using those skills, utilising those skills, not making any volunteers feel uncomfortable, underprepared, or like they're leading a session that they don't have the right skills or don't feel capable to deliver. It's really important to keep people safe. When we're looking at our final thing, which is transport, and as Felix said, this is all within the camping and residential checklist, which is really important to be filling in before we take our young people away on overnight stays. So making sure that any volunteers who are driving young people or equipment that they have the right appropriate, the right license, the right insurance, and the right skills to do this again. Maybe if somebody's driving a van or a lorry to a camp, making sure that they've had the experience of doing that, that their license allows them to do that. Making sure that all vehicles carrying equipment and children, I guess, are within the legal weight limits, so that we're not getting caught out and putting volunteers into a bad position by, you know, having an overloaded lorry or van, which has been known to happen in the past. So looking forward now to building on good practice. First of all, looking at how can we promote young people's participation in our camping and residential experiences and events that we're planning and delivering. So as we've just been alluding to, sharing the planning, sharing the responsibility, and sharing the leadership, not just between that sort of volunteer team, but talk to the young people. What meals have they enjoyed at previous camps? What activities would they like to see? What games would they like to play? Who would they like to share a dormitory or a tent with? How would they like the day to run? Share with each other, give young people that voice that's been listened to, which songs do they want to sing around the campfire, that sort of thing. Giving time to sort of stand back ourselves, as people were saying at the beginning, noticing and taking action on how important that independence is for young people. So giving young people the time to have free time, enjoy themselves, get to know each other, and build some of those bonds that we were talking about at the beginning. As adults and volunteers, we should always be modelling the behaviour that we want to encourage from our young people. We want to be trying our best to work together and cooperate with our other volunteers, so that we are modelling that and encouraging that from our young members as well. If adults are on clan, for example, taking part in helping with cooking, preparing, or serving food or washing up, we don't want to be not taking part in those things when they're expected of us. We want to be modelling that to the young people. And washing up can be really boring, but it can be really fun as well. It can be a great time to have good conversations. Listen, adapt, and follow through and respond to the young people's input. Doing evaluations at the end of camps to then bring different activities to the next camp, or build on some of the activities that you've started that they really enjoyed. And we put here, Mary Poppins it up. Yeah, open up your kind of magic bag. Sometimes we have to adapt our plans, change them in order to make sure that the well-being, the comfortability, the excitement for our young people is still there. Sometimes when it's rained a lot, it's really important to have that Mary Poppins bag close by, so that we can pull out what we might need to make the day go as smoothly as possible. How do we ensure that everybody has fun? Somebody said that was the most important thing and why we take our young people away, and I couldn't agree more. So we need to be working together, we need to be cooperating, as we said before, sharing the burden, spreading the different roles between everybody. Don't over program. Lots of times I've seen camp programs where people are literally programming down to the minute of how long somebody should brush their teeth for, or how long it's going to take to drink a hot chocolate. Sometimes it's nice to allow time for that free time, for that downtime, having a rest hour maybe for people to decompress from activities that might be overwhelming, having time to just play card games together, play small games, have those conversations that we might not have time in our everyday lives to be having. Make sure we're including temperature checks, which is what we've kind of alluded to throughout the session. Make sure we're checking in with people, make sure we've read their health and consent forms, make sure we're aware of those young people who might need a little bit more checking in on, make sure we're aware of the kind of personality and needs of our young people that we're taking away. Really important, which isn't down here, but making sure that we are aware of the needs of the young people that we're taking away. Sometimes, especially in that sort of summer season, we might see some young people who haven't been to group night for a long time, who come along and would like to come along to a camping trip. It's really important that we're aware of any changes since the last time we saw that young person. Make sure that the adults that are taking the group away, feel confident to, as we said before, take on that sort of loco parentis role for the young people that they're taking away, and feel comfortable that they know them well enough to help them through any challenges that we might face. Again, making sure that we're including everybody in planning, and make sure that our programme meets a range of needs we might have there. And then lastly, how do we ensure that we're supporting the development of new skills? So letting people learn through doing, mostly that will come through to young people, but also for volunteers. For young people, this might be the first time. I know that I've taken lots of young people away where it's the first time that they're using a tin opener, or it's the first time that they are chopping up carrots and using a peeler, or different things in the kitchen, or it might be the first time that they've toasted a marshmallow on the fire. Sometimes things don't go to plan and you've grated the whole carrot and didn't realize that you needed to chop it, or you've opened the tin wrong. But through learning, through doing, we can improve on our skills and develop new skills as we're going along as well. As some people are here, quite new volunteers, so making sure that our new volunteers are involved in that pre-planning, and it's not just the usual suspects, the same old people kind of planning, and as Felix said, pulling out the same old risk assessment, pulling out the same old plan. Make sure we're including newer volunteers in the planning process as well. Giving chances and opportunities for our older young people to shadow and share the key roles, so allowing some of our venturers or DS to take on some of those key roles at camp, so they can either take that back to their own events, or as they grow older, kind of take on different leadership roles within your groups or within groups that they might join in the future. Make sure that we're setting achievable levels of challenge for our young people, obviously, so that they can manage those things and not feel overburdened with taking on every role in the camp. So I'm going to pass, Felix, is it all right if you go through some of the barriers, just because my computer has frozen again? If you go through the first
Yeah,
one.
thank you, Lauren. You might have to interject if I'm not covering the key things that you had anticipated covering here. Right, financial, cost of living, paying volunteers. Lauren, you're going to start me off on that one. Can you lead off on that one? Sorry to pass the buck straight back.
That's all right, I can see it again now. So
You see it?
financial barriers, lots of people are suffering with the cost of living, sometimes paying to volunteer, paying to participate as a young person, having families within different groups. Thanks for joining us, Roman. Having lots of siblings in different groups can make something like going on a weekend away or some camp quite expensive. So there are lots of different things that groups do to try and remove that financial barrier, whether that's through fundraising, community grants, whether that is through the district having some funds available that they can use to cover volunteering costs, to cover volunteer expenses, and to subsidize or support young people. We are developing more ways for kind of national and centrally run events that we can also kind of try to ease or reduce the financial burden of coming to take part in brilliant experiences. There might be societal barriers to participation, things like taking responsibility for other people, staying away without parents, staying away from your parents. As Felix said, important to kind of notice the different roles that people take on. So if we have young carers, it might be really hard for them to have a weekend away from their family or the people that they're caring for, as well as adults having different societal barriers as well. So looking at sort of cultural barriers, who's missing from our groups? How do we help make them feel welcome? How do we help make people feel like a weekend away with our group is going to be a positive experience for them, and that they're not going to be overburdened, or it's not going to be different from something that they're used to and how they traditionally go away? Time and energy. It is quite demanding to take other people's young people away, to look after young people for the whole weekend and keep them safe, or for a summer camp. And it is demanding also on the planning for the event. So looking at how we can, as we've alluded to a lot over the session, spread the burden, spread the load, have quite a substantial team of people to make plans and make sure that we're sharing that and not just relying on one or two people to do all of the work. Additional needs might be a barrier to participating, physical, emotional, and sensory. So looking at that point for volunteers and for young people as well, how can we overcome some of those barriers? How can we put reasonable adjustment in place to help people feel more welcome, included, and make provision that if we need to, we can make different plans or alter our plans to meet the needs of the young people that are in our groups. Where can we find further support? So On our website, we have a whole section dedicated to camping and residential trips. You'll find there the checklist, which we've talked about this evening. You'll find out more about insurance, and there's an FAQs there as well for camp organisers. You'll find advice for new volunteers, what to expect if it's your first camping residential trip. On the website, you can also find things about all of these different topics, which are lots of different elements of running our camping and residential trips, but also, as I say, lots of common ground, lots of swap over, hangover between group planning and group activities and taking young people away on overnight trips as well. So things around staying safe, ideas for food, program, finance and budgeting, wild camping and bivvying, volunteer screening, first aid, gas safety, transport, clans and chores, and also maybe more useful for those newer volunteers, but a bit of a jargon buster, because often we at Woodcraft Folk, people who have been here for quite a while, we can talk in tongues and use words and phrases that maybe in the real world we haven't heard before. Mia's asking a question in the chat to say, do volunteer leaders need to pay for places on trips? And can we claim back any cost like transport? That's really great question. Often it's best to ask the other people who you're going camping with, whether that's your group or your district. Every group and district seems to have a slightly different capacity to help fund these things, whether, as I say, they've got funding from the past, whether there's a current community fund in place, whether there are subsidies that we can draw upon. Some groups, volunteers pay less than the young people attending. In some groups, volunteers pay nothing, young people pay more. In some groups, people pay what they feel they can afford to pay. Everybody does that slightly differently. So there's no right or wrong way. Lots of people do that in a different format. Has anybody